On October 27, 1992, three best friends walked into Mammoth Cave carrying nothing but flashlights and teenage courage. 1 month later, search teams found something that defied every law of nature and human survival. What they discovered deep inside those limestone tunnels would haunt investigators for decades. The official report was sealed, witnesses were silenced, and the truth about what really happened in those dark passages remains buried to this day. This is the story of the Mammoth Cave disappearance, a mystery that has haunted Kentucky for over 30 years. Three friends who entered the Earth's darkness and emerged, changed. What happened in those tunnels? Who kept Tommy alive? And where did the other two boys go? Before we explore what really happened in that cave, comment where you're tuning in from. It's incredible how stories like this still grip people across the world. The autumn of 1992 felt different in Bowling Green, Kentucky. The leaves turned earlier that year, painting the hills in deep reds and golden yellows. For three teenage boys, this October would be their last together. In the 90s, the world felt different then. No cell phones, no GPS tracking, no instant communication with worried parents. When kids disappeared, they were truly gone until someone found them. Tommy Morrison was 15, the quiet one of the group. He had sandy brown hair that always fell into his eyes and a nervous habit of tapping his fingers when he was thinking. Tommy loved reading adventure books, especially stories about explorers and hidden treasures. His bedroom walls were covered with maps of famous caves around the world. He dreamed of becoming a real explorer someday, just like the heroes in his books. Tommy lived with his grandmother after his parents died in a car accident when he was 12. Mrs. Morrison worked double shifts at the local diner to pay for Tommy's school clothes and books. She worried about him spending so much time alone, always with his nose buried in cave exploration guides and geology magazines. Jake Patterson was 16. Born just 2 weeks after Tommy. He was the leader of their small group, tall for his age with bright red hair and freckles scattered across his nose like stars. Jake was the kind of boy who could talk his way out of any trouble and into any adventure. He had a smile that made adults trust him and a curiosity that often got him into dangerous situations. Jake's father worked at the coal mine, and his mother cleaned houses for wealthy families in town. They were strict parents who expected Jake home before dark every night. But Jake was clever about bending rules without breaking them completely. He knew exactly how long he could stay out before his parents started worrying. The third member of their group was Michael Chen, also 15. His family had moved to Kentucky from California the year before when his father got a job at the university. Michael was the smartest of the three boys, always carrying a small notebook where he wrote down interesting facts and observations. He wore thick glasses that made his dark eyes look larger than they were. Michael struggled to fit in at their small-town school. Some kids made fun of his accent and the way he pronounced certain words. But Tommy and Jake welcomed him into their friendship without question. They spent most afternoons together, exploring the woods behind the school or reading about famous cave systems in the library. All three boys shared one dangerous obsession: caves. They had explored every small cave and rock formation within walking distance of town. They knew which ones were safe for beginners and which ones required real equipment. But they had never attempted anything as serious as Mammoth Cave. Mammoth Cave was different. It was the longest-known cave system in the world, with over 400 miles of mapped tunnels. Most of it was protected as a national park with guided tours for visitors, but the boys had heard rumors about unexplored sections, hidden entrances that weren't watched by park rangers. The idea started innocently enough. On October 20th, exactly 1 week before they disappeared, Jake found an old magazine article in the school library. The article described parts of Mammoth Cave that had never been fully explored, areas where new tunnels were still being discovered. Jake showed the article to Tommy and Michael during lunch. The magazine included a rough map showing several entrance points to unexplored areas. One entrance was marked as dangerous, experienced cavers only. But to 3 teenage boys hungry for adventure, dangerous sounded like exactly what they were looking for. Tommy was immediately excited. He had been reading about cave exploration techniques for months. He knew about proper safety equipment, how to navigate underground, and what signs to watch for that indicated unstable rock formations. At least, he thought he knew. Michael was more cautious. He suggested they ask their parents for permission and maybe contact the Park Service for a guided exploration. But Jake laughed at this idea. Adults would never let them explore the really interesting parts of the cave. They would be stuck on boring tourist paths, looking at the same formations that thousands of people saw every year. The 3 boys spent the next week planning their adventure in secret. They gathered supplies, flashlights, extra batteries, rope, a small first aid kit, and snacks. Tommy borrowed camping equipment from his grandmother's garage, telling her he was going on a school hiking trip. Jake told his parents he was sleeping over at Tommy's house. Michael said he was studying late at the library with friends. None of them told their families the truth about where they were really going. They planned to explore for just a few hours on Tuesday afternoon, October 27th. School ended early that day because of teacher meetings, giving them extra time before anyone expected them home. They would bike to the cave entrance, explore for 3 hours, and be back by dinner time. It seemed like a perfect plan. They had studied the maps, gathered proper equipment, and chosen a day when they wouldn't be missed for several hours. What could possibly go wrong? Tuesday morning dawned gray and cold. A light rain had fallen overnight, making the ground soft and muddy. Tommy woke up early, too excited to sleep. He packed his backpack carefully, double-checking his flashlight and making sure he had extra batteries wrapped in plastic bags to keep them dry. At school that day, the 3 boys could barely concentrate on their classes. Jake kept looking at the clock, counting the hours until they could begin their adventure. Michael reviewed his notes about cave safety, trying to memorize important facts about underground navigation. Tommy spent his lunch period in the library, reading one final article about Mammoth Cave. He discovered that the area they planned to explore had been closed to the public since 1989 after a minor cave-in injured 2 experienced cavers. This information should have worried him. Instead, it made the adventure seem even more exciting. When school ended at 2:30 p.m., the 3 boys met at the bike racks behind the building. They had hidden their exploration gear in Jake's locker earlier that morning. Now they transferred everything to their backpacks, trying to look casual as they prepared for their secret mission. The ride to Mammoth Cave took 45 minutes on their bikes. They followed back roads to avoid being seen by anyone who might recognize them and ask questions. The October air was crisp and clean, filled with the smell of fallen leaves and distant wood smoke. They reached the hidden entrance Jake had found on the old map at 3:20 p.m. It was exactly where the magazine article said it would be, a narrow opening between 2 large rocks, partially hidden by overgrown bushes. A small metal sign warned that this area was closed to the public, but the sign was old and rusty. It looked like it had been there for years. The boys hid their bikes in the woods and put on their headlamps. Tommy felt his heart racing with excitement as they approached the cave entrance. This was it. Their first real adventure, their chance to explore somewhere no other kids from school had ever been. Jake went first, squeezing through the narrow opening between the rocks. The space was tighter than it looked from outside. He had to remove his backpack and push it ahead of him as he crawled through the entrance. Tommy followed next, his hands shaking slightly as he pulled himself through the rocky opening. The stone was cold and damp against his skin. For a moment he felt trapped between the rocks, but then he pushed forward and emerged into a larger space where Jake was waiting. Michael came last, struggling more than the others because his backpack was heaviest with all his notebooks and extra supplies. The opening seemed to grip him as he crawled through, scraping against his shoulders and back. By 3:45 p.m., all three boys were inside the cave system. They stood together in a chamber about the size of a large closet, their headlamps creating moving circles of light on the dark stone walls. The air smelled different here, earthy and ancient, like something that had been hidden from sunlight for millions of years. None of them realized this would be the last time all three would stand together. The first chamber led to a narrow tunnel that sloped downward into complete darkness. The boys could hear water dripping somewhere in the distance, a steady rhythm that echoed off the stone walls. Their headlamps revealed rough limestone formations covered in strange mineral deposits that sparkled like jewels in the artificial light. Tommy took the lead as they entered the tunnel. He had studied cave exploration techniques and knew to mark their path so they could find their way back out. He used pieces of bright orange surveyor's tape, tying them to rocky projections every 50 feet. The tunnel was narrow, but not uncomfortably so. They could walk upright most of the time, though occasionally they had to duck under low-hanging rock formations. The floor was uneven, covered with loose stones and patches of slippery mud. After walking for about 15 minutes, they reached a junction where the tunnel split into 3 different paths. Jake pulled out the photocopied map they had brought, trying to match their location to the rough drawings in the magazine article. Michael suggested they choose the middle path, which seemed to slope upward toward what might be another chamber. Tommy wanted to explore the left path, which looked wider and easier to navigate. Jake was attracted to the right path, because it seemed to lead deeper into the cave system. They spent 10 minutes debating which direction to go. Finally, Jake made the decision for them. As the unofficial leader of their group, he declared they would explore the right path first. If it led to a dead end or became too difficult, they could always return and try one of the other routes. The right path was different from the entrance tunnel. It was wider, but had a lower ceiling, forcing them to walk in a half-crouch position. The walls showed signs of water damage, with smooth sections where underground streams had carved channels through the limestone over thousands of years. About 30 minutes into their exploration, they discovered their first real cave formation, a small underground chamber filled with stalactites and stalagmites. The boys were amazed by the natural beauty hidden beneath the earth. Tommy's headlamp revealed formations that looked like frozen waterfalls and stone flowers. They spent 20 minutes in this chamber, taking turns describing what they saw and trying to imagine how long it had taken for these formations to grow. Michael filled 3 pages in his notebook with observations and rough sketches. But they were not alone in the cave system. As they prepared to leave the chamber and continue exploring, Tommy heard something that made his blood run cold. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps echoing from somewhere deeper in the tunnels. Tommy held up his hand, signaling for the others to stop moving. In the sudden silence, all 3 boys could hear it clearly, the sound of someone walking through the tunnels ahead of them. The footsteps were irregular, sometimes quick, sometimes slow, as if the person was having trouble navigating in the darkness. Jake whispered that it might be a park ranger checking the closed sections of the cave. Michael suggested it could be another group of explorers who had found the same hidden entrance. But Tommy felt something was wrong. The footsteps didn't sound right. They seemed to drag slightly, as if the person was injured or carrying something heavy. The boys stood frozen in the chamber for several minutes, listening to the strange sounds echoing through the tunnels. The footsteps would come closer for a few seconds, then fade away, then return again from a different direction. It was impossible to tell exactly where the sounds were coming from or how far away the person might be. Finally, Jake decided they should investigate. If it was a park ranger, they would explain that they were just curious students interested in geology. If it was another explorer, maybe they could share information about the cave system. They left the chamber and continued deeper into the right tunnel. The ceiling became even lower, forcing them to crawl on their hands and knees in some sections. Their headlamps created dancing shadows on the walls as they moved forward slowly and carefully. After crawling for about 10 minutes, they reached another junction. This time, there were only two choices: a narrow passage that continued straight ahead, or a wider opening that curved to the left. The footsteps seemed to be coming from the passage that went straight. Tommy was beginning to feel nervous about their adventure. They had been underground for over an hour, and they were getting farther from the entrance than they had originally planned. His grandmother would expect him home by 6 p.m., and it was already after 5 p.m. But Jake was more excited than ever. The mysterious footsteps meant they were close to discovering something really interesting. Maybe they would find evidence of other cave explorers, or even discover a new chamber that wasn't on any official maps. Michael was carefully documenting their route in his notebook, drawing rough maps and noting important landmarks. He was worried about getting lost, but he trusted Tommy's orange tape markers to guide them back to the entrance. They chose to follow the straight passage toward the source of the footsteps. This tunnel was different from anything they had seen before. The walls were smoother, as if they had been carved by flowing water over a very long time. Strange markings covered the stone surfaces, not natural formations, but scratches and symbols that looked almost like writing. Tommy stopped to examine these markings more closely. They didn't look like modern graffiti left by other explorers. The scratches were deep and old, filled with mineral deposits that suggested they had been made many years ago. Some of the symbols looked familiar, like letters or numbers, but he couldn't read them clearly in the dim light of his headlamp. As they moved deeper into this strange tunnel, the footsteps suddenly stopped. The silence was more frightening than the mysterious sounds had been. It felt like something was waiting for them in the darkness ahead. That's when they heard the first scream. The scream echoed through the tunnels like nothing any of the boys had ever heard before. It wasn't quite human, but it wasn't animal either. It was a sound of pure terror and pain that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at the same time. All three boys froze in place, their hearts pounding so hard they could hear their own pulse in their ears. The scream lasted for about 10 seconds, then faded into a low, moaning sound that gradually disappeared into the darkness. Jake was the first to speak, his voice barely above a whisper. He suggested that someone might be hurt and need help. Maybe another explorer had fallen or gotten trapped somewhere in the cave system. As frightening as the scream had been, they couldn't just leave someone who might be injured. Tommy wasn't so sure. Something about the sound felt wrong, unnatural. It reminded him of stories his grandmother had told him about old mining accidents, about voices that supposedly still echoed in abandoned mine shafts years after the miners had died. Michael was already writing in his notebook, trying to record exactly what they had heard. He noted the time, the location, and a detailed description of the sound. His scientific mind was working to find a logical explanation for what they had experienced. The boys debated whether to continue forward or turn back toward the entrance. They had been underground for over an hour and a half, and Tommy was getting worried about the time. But the thought that someone might need help was stronger than their fear. They decided to move forward, but more carefully than before. Jake led the way, followed by Tommy, with Michael bringing up the rear. They moved slowly, stopping every few steps to listen for more sounds. The tunnel began to slope downward more steeply. The air felt different here, thicker and more humid. Their headlamps revealed that the walls were covered with a thin layer of moisture, making the stone surfaces shine like black glass. After walking for another 10 minutes, they reached the most dangerous part of their journey, a narrow passage where they had to squeeze between two large rock formations. The space was barely wide enough for one person at a time, and the floor dropped away into darkness on one side. Jake went first, carefully feeling his way through the narrow gap. The rock walls pressed against his shoulders as he moved sideways, step by step. His headlamp showed that the passage was only about 6 feet long, but it felt like much more in the claustrophobic darkness. Tommy followed, his hands shaking as he pressed against the cold stone walls. Halfway through the passage, he heard something that made him stop moving. Breathing. Someone was breathing heavily somewhere very close by, but he couldn't tell where the sound was coming from. Michael was still on the other side of the passage, waiting his turn to squeeze through the narrow gap. He could see Tommy's headlamp stopped in the middle of the passage, but he couldn't understand why Tommy wasn't moving forward. That's when the accident happened. As Tommy tried to move forward through the narrow passage, something shifted in the rock formation above him. He heard a grinding sound like massive stones moving against each other. Before he could react, a large piece of limestone broke free from the ceiling and crashed down. The falling rock was too big to crush him completely, but it was perfectly positioned to pin him in place. The boulder wedged itself between the walls of the narrow passage, trapping Tommy's neck and shoulder against the stone floor. He couldn't move forward or backward. Jake heard the crash and Tommy's cry of pain. He immediately turned around and tried to reach his friend, but the fallen rock completely blocked the passage. There was no way for Jake to get back to where Tommy was trapped. Michael saw what had happened from the other side. He could see Tommy's legs sticking out from under the boulder, but he couldn't reach him either. The three friends were now separated by tons of solid rock, with Tommy trapped in the middle. Tommy was conscious, but in terrible pain. The boulder pressed against his neck and shoulder, making it difficult to breathe. He could move his arms and legs slightly, but any attempt to pull himself free only made the pain worse. He called out to his friends, his voice echoing strangely in the confined space. Jake tried to find another way around the blockage, but the narrow passage was the only route between the two sections of tunnel. He searched frantically with his headlamp, looking for any crack or opening that might allow him to reach Tommy. Michael approached the boulder from his side, trying to find a way to move it or create space for Tommy to escape. But the rock was massive, probably weighing several 100 pounds. It would take special equipment and multiple people to move something that heavy. For 20 minutes, Jake and Michael worked desperately to free their friend. They tried using loose rocks as levers, attempting to shift the boulder even a few inches. They searched for alternative routes through the cave system. Nothing worked. Tommy's voice was getting weaker. The pressure on his neck was affecting his ability to breathe normally. He told his friends that he was getting dizzy and that his vision was starting to blur around the edges. That's when Jake made a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. He told Tommy to stay calm and conserve his strength. He and Michael would go back to the surface and get help. They would bring rescue equipment and experienced cavers who could move the boulder safely. Michael wanted to stay with Tommy, but Jake convinced him that they needed to stick together. The cave system was confusing, and it would be easy for one person to get lost trying to find the entrance alone. Their only chance of saving Tommy was to reach the surface as quickly as possible and bring back professional help. Tommy begged them not to leave him alone in the darkness, but Jake promised they would be back with help within a few hours. He left his extra flashlight and batteries where Tommy could reach them. Michael left some of his food and water as well. The last thing Tommy heard was the sound of his friend's footsteps fading away into the tunnels, leaving him trapped and alone in the Earth's darkness. Jake and Michael reached the surface at 7:15 p.m., almost 4 hours after they had entered the cave. Both boys were exhausted, dirty, and terrified about their friend's condition. They rode their bikes directly to the Mammoth Cave National Park headquarters, where they found a night security guard. At first, the guard didn't believe their story. 3 teenage boys exploring closed sections of the cave system seemed impossible. The hidden entrance they described wasn't supposed to be accessible to the public, but when Jake and Michael showed him the orange surveyor's tape still stuck to their clothes and the detailed maps Michael had drawn, he realized they were telling the truth. The guard immediately called the park's emergency rescue team. Within 30 minutes, 4 experienced cave rescue specialists were assembled with proper equipment: hydraulic jacks, rock-moving tools, portable lighting systems, and medical supplies. But there was a problem. Jake and Michael couldn't remember exactly how to get back to where Tommy was trapped. In their panic to reach the surface, they had taken several wrong turns and hadn't paid attention to Tommy's orange tape markers. The cave system had dozens of interconnected tunnels, and without a clear route, the rescue team could spend days searching for the right location. The boys led the rescue team to the hidden entrance, but once underground, their memory became unreliable. Every tunnel looked the same in the artificial light. The chamber with stalactites and stalagmites could have been any one of several similar formations. For 6 hours, the rescue team searched through the cave system, following false leads and dead-end tunnels. They called Tommy's name constantly, listening for any response that might guide them to his location. But the cave system absorbed sound in strange ways, making echoes and distorting voices until it was impossible to determine where sounds were coming from. At 2 a.m. on October 28th, the search was temporarily suspended. The rescue team needed to rest and reorganize their efforts. They had covered less than half of the possible tunnel combinations, and Tommy had been trapped for almost 12 hours. Jake and Michael were taken to the local police station, where they were questioned about their unauthorized cave exploration. Both boys were exhausted and traumatized. They provided as much detail as they could remember, but their descriptions of the route became more confused as the hours passed. Their parents arrived at the police station around 3 a.m. Mrs. Morrison broke down when she learned that her grandson was trapped underground. Jake's father was furious about the boy's reckless behavior, but his anger turned to worry as he realized how serious the situation had become. Michael's parents were calm but devastated. They had moved to Kentucky to give their son a safer, quieter life than he had known in California. Now their worst fears had come true in the most unexpected way. The search resumed at dawn on October 28th, with additional rescue personnel from 3 surrounding counties. But Mammoth Cave was vast and complex, with new tunnels being discovered regularly. Finding one trapped teenager in such an enormous system would require either incredible luck or much more detailed information about his exact location. As the hours turned into days, hope for Tommy's survival began to fade. The search for Tommy Morrison became the largest cave rescue operation in Kentucky's history. More than 40 professional cave rescue specialists joined the effort, along with dozens of volunteers from local communities. The story made headlines in newspapers across the state, bringing attention to the dangers of unsupervised cave exploration. Jake and Michael spent 3 days underground with various rescue teams, trying to retrace their steps and locate the passage where Tommy was trapped. But the cave system seemed different somehow. Tunnels they remembered as wide and easy to navigate now appeared narrow and treacherous. Chambers they had found quickly during their first exploration remained hidden despite hours of careful searching. On the 3rd day of the search, one team thought they heard faint tapping sounds coming from deep within the cave system. They followed the sounds for over 2 hours, calling Tommy's name and listening for responses. But the tapping stopped suddenly, and they never found its source. Another team discovered fresh orange surveyor's tape, tied to rock formations in a section of the cave that Jake and Michael didn't remember visiting. The tape was identical to the markers Tommy had been using, but it was found in tunnels that didn't match any of the boys' descriptions of their route. Strange things began happening to the search teams. Equipment would malfunction in specific areas of the cave. Flashlights would dim or fail completely, even with fresh batteries. Radio communication devices would pick up static that sounded almost like whispered voices. Several experienced cavers reported feeling like they were being watched while working in the deeper tunnels. Others mentioned hearing footsteps echoing from areas they had already searched thoroughly. One rescue team leader, a man with 20 years of cave rescue experience, requested to be reassigned to surface operations after spending a night underground. He never explained what had frightened him. By October 31st, 4 days after Tommy disappeared, the official search was scaled back. Cave rescue experts explained that survival without food, water, and proper shelter was unlikely beyond 72 hours. The October temperatures underground would have been near freezing, and Tommy had been wearing only light clothing. Jake and Michael returned to school, but neither boy could concentrate on normal activities. They spent every afternoon at the cave entrance, hoping to hear some sign that Tommy was still alive. Local news reporters interviewed them repeatedly, asking for details about their friend and their unauthorized exploration. The boys' friendship began to change under the pressure of guilt and grief. Jake blamed himself for leading them into the cave and for making the decision to leave Tommy alone. Michael obsessed over his notes and maps, convinced that he had missed some crucial detail that could have saved his friend. Tommy's grandmother never gave up hope. She visited the cave entrance every day, sometimes staying from dawn until sunset. She brought blankets, hot coffee, and sandwiches for any rescue workers who were still searching. Her faith that Tommy would be found alive kept some volunteer searchers motivated long after the official teams had declared the mission hopeless. But as October turned into November, even Mrs. Morrison began to accept that her grandson might never come home. Then, on November 27th, exactly 1 month after the boys had entered the cave, everything changed. The call came at 6:43 a.m. on a Friday morning. A new volunteer search team, working in a section of the cave that had been explored dozens of times before, heard something that made them stop everything they were doing. Someone was singing. The voice was weak and hoarse, but unmistakably human. It was coming from the same area where rescue teams had been searching for weeks. The volunteers followed the sound through tunnels they had mapped and cleared multiple times during the previous month. They found Tommy Morrison alive. He was exactly where Jake and Michael had said he would be, trapped under the same boulder in the narrow passage between rock formations. But the discovery raised more questions than it answered because what they found was impossible. Tommy was alert and responsive. He was thin and pale, but he was not dehydrated or starving. Someone had been taking care of him during the month he had been trapped underground. The rescue team immediately began working to free him from under the boulder. They used hydraulic equipment to lift the massive rock, just enough for Tommy to squeeze out from underneath. The entire operation took 4 hours, but Tommy emerged from his month-long imprisonment in remarkably good condition. As soon as he was free, Tommy began asking about Jake and Michael. He wanted to know where his friends had gone and why they hadn't come back for him as promised. When rescue workers explained that Jake and Michael had reached the surface safely and that a month had passed since the accident, Tommy became confused and agitated. According to Tommy, Jake and Michael had left him only 3 days ago. He had no memory of being trapped for a full month. He remembered the boulder falling and pinning him in place, but everything after that was unclear and fragmented. More disturbing was Tommy's explanation of how he had survived. He claimed that someone had been visiting him regularly, bringing water and small amounts of food. The person would appear suddenly in the darkness beyond his reach, place food and water where he could access it, then disappear without speaking. Tommy said he never saw his mysterious caretaker clearly. The person always stayed outside the range of his flashlight, moving carefully and quietly through the tunnels. Sometimes he would hear breathing or soft footsteps, but whenever he called out, there was no response. The rescue team searched thoroughly for any sign of another person in the cave system. They found no evidence that anyone else had been in the tunnels during the past month. No footprints, no food containers, no camping equipment, no trace of human presence except for Tommy himself. Medical examinations at the hospital revealed that Tommy was malnourished, but not severely so. He had lost about 15 pounds during his month underground, but his condition was consistent with someone who had been receiving small amounts of food and water regularly. Without this care, he would have died within days of the accident. But who had been feeding him? And how had they accessed the sealed cave system without being detected by the extensive search operations? Tommy's memories of his month underground were fragmented and strange. During interviews with doctors, psychologists, and cave rescue specialists, he provided details that seemed impossible, but were delivered with complete sincerity. He remembered the accident clearly, the grinding sound of shifting rock, the boulder falling, the pain as it pinned him against the stone floor. He remembered Jake and Michael promising to return with help, then hearing their footsteps fade away into the tunnels. After that, his memories became dreamlike and inconsistent. Sometimes he thought he had been trapped for only a few hours. Other times, he felt like he had been underground for years. The darkness played tricks with time, making minutes feel like hours, and hours disappear completely. The mysterious caretaker first appeared on what Tommy believed was his second day underground. He had been calling for help, his voice echoing through the empty tunnels when he heard soft footsteps approaching from the direction Jake and Michael had gone. Tommy called out, thinking his friends had returned, but instead of familiar voices answering, he heard only careful movements in the darkness beyond his trapped position. Someone was there, just outside the range of his failing flashlight, but they wouldn't respond to his questions or calls for help. Then he felt water dripping onto his lips, not the random drips from the cave ceiling, but a steady stream being poured carefully into his mouth. The water was clean and cold, better than anything he had ever tasted. When he had drunk enough, the flow stopped, and he heard quiet footsteps moving away. This pattern repeated every few hours throughout his captivity. The mysterious person would appear silently, provide water, sometimes leave small pieces of food within his reach, then disappear back into the tunnels. Tommy never saw them clearly, never heard them speak, never understood who they were or why they were helping him. The food was simple but nourishing, pieces of bread, small chunks of cheese, occasionally dried fruit or nuts. Everything was fresh, not the kind of emergency supplies that cave explorers might carry. Someone was bringing food from the surface world and delivering it to Tommy in his underground prison. Tommy also described strange dreams or visions during his time underground. He said he sometimes heard music echoing through the tunnels, not modern songs, but old melodies that sounded like they came from another century. He heard voices speaking in languages he didn't recognize, and sometimes he saw lights moving in the distance that weren't flashlights or headlamps. Most disturbing were his memories of the footsteps, not just the careful movements of his caretaker, but other sounds. Groups of people walking through the tunnels, sometimes marching in rhythm like soldiers, sometimes shuffling slowly like they were carrying heavy burdens. These sounds always came from areas of the cave that the rescue teams had declared empty and thoroughly searched. When psychologists suggested that hunger, isolation, and stress might have caused hallucinations, Tommy became frustrated and insisted that everything he remembered had really happened. He could describe the taste of the water, the texture of the food, the specific sounds of different footsteps. His memories were too detailed and consistent to be simple fantasies. But if Tommy was telling the truth, then someone had been living in Mammoth Cave during the entire month-long search operation. Someone had been moving through tunnels that were supposed to be empty, avoiding dozens of rescue workers and caring for a trapped teenager without leaving any trace of their presence. The question that haunted everyone involved in the rescue was simple. Who had kept Tommy Morrison alive? The discovery of Tommy Morrison alive after a month underground attracted national attention. News crews from major television networks arrived in Kentucky to cover the story. Cave rescue experts from around the world came to study what they were calling the Mammoth Cave miracle. But the more investigators looked into Tommy's survival, the more mysterious the case became. FBI specialists were called in to examine the cave system for evidence of the unknown caretaker. They used advanced equipment to search for fingerprints, DNA samples, fabric fibers, or any other trace that might identify who had been helping Tommy. The results were baffling. They found no evidence that anyone else had been in the cave system during the past month, except for Tommy and the official search teams. The tunnels where Tommy claimed his caretaker had appeared showed no signs of regular human traffic. There were no food storage areas, no camping sites, no hidden caches of supplies. Even more strange was the discovery that the area where Tommy had been trapped was completely inaccessible to the search teams during most of their month-long operation. A secondary cave-in had occurred 3 days after Tommy's accident, blocking the tunnels that led to his location. The route Jake and Michael had used to escape was now sealed by tons of fallen rock. This secondary cave-in had been recorded in the search team's reports, and it was the reason they had never found Tommy during their extensive searches. The rescue workers had assumed that the blocked tunnels were empty because there was no way for anyone to reach them from the main cave system. Yet somehow, Tommy's mysterious caretaker had been accessing this sealed area regularly for an entire month. They had been bringing fresh food and water to Tommy, despite the fact that all known routes to his location were completely blocked. Underground mapping specialists used sonar and ground-penetrating radar to search for hidden passages that might connect to the sealed tunnels. They found no evidence of secret routes or undiscovered cave systems. According to their equipment, the area where Tommy had been trapped was completely isolated from the rest of Mammoth Cave. The investigation expanded to include local communities around the cave system. FBI agents interviewed residents, store owners, and park employees, looking for anyone who might have been purchasing unusual amounts of food or water during the past month. They found no suspicious activity. They also investigated the possibility that someone had been living secretly in the cave system for an extended period. Homeless individuals sometimes sought shelter in caves during cold weather, and it was possible that someone had established a hidden camp in the unexplored sections of Mammoth Cave. But this theory also fell apart under investigation. Living in a cave system requires supplies, equipment, and regular access to the surface for food and water. The FBI found no evidence of long-term human habitation anywhere in the accessible areas of the cave. More importantly, the sealed tunnels where Tommy had been trapped would have been impossible for anyone to reach consistently over a month-long period. Local historians were consulted to research any legends or stories about Mammoth Cave that might explain the mysterious caretaker. What they discovered added another layer of strangeness to an already impossible situation. The research into Mammoth Cave's history revealed disturbing information that had been largely forgotten by local communities. During the Civil War, the cave system had been used for more than just tourism and scientific exploration. In 1863, a group of Confederate soldiers had used the hidden tunnels as a secret base for guerrilla operations against Union forces in Kentucky. These soldiers, cut off from their main army and declared deserters by their own commanders, had lived underground for several months during the harsh winter of 1863 to 1864. Historical records from that period were incomplete, but newspaper accounts from 1864 described strange reports from local farmers. People living near the cave system claimed to hear voices and see lights moving underground at night. Some reported finding evidence that someone was stealing food from their farms and root cellars. Union soldiers eventually discovered the Confederate hideout in March 1864. According to military reports, they sealed several cave entrances with explosives to prevent further use by enemy forces. But the records suggested that not all of the Confederate soldiers were captured. Some may have been trapped underground when the entrances were sealed. Local folklore from the late 1800s included stories about cave spirits that helped lost travelers and explorers. These tales described mysterious figures that would appear in the darkness to guide lost people back to safety or provide food and water to those in danger. Most historians dismissed these stories as typical frontier legends. similar to tales about guardian angels or helpful ghosts that were common in isolated communities. But the stories shared remarkably similar details with Tommy's account of his mysterious caretaker. The cave spirits were always described as silent figures that appeared suddenly in the darkness, provided help without speaking, then disappeared back into the tunnels. They were said to be most active during times of crisis, appearing to help people who were trapped, lost, or in mortal danger. One particularly detailed account from 1887 described a mining engineer who became lost in Mammoth Cave during a survey expedition. He claimed that a silent figure led him through miles of tunnels back to a known entrance, leaving fresh water and food at regular intervals during the journey. Like Tommy, the engineer never saw his helper clearly and received no response when he tried to communicate. These historical accounts raised troubling questions about Tommy's experience. Had he been helped by the same mysterious presence that had been reported in Mammoth Cave for over a century? Were the cave spirits of local folklore actually the ghosts of Confederate soldiers who had died underground during the Civil War? Or was there a more disturbing explanation? Could descendants of those trapped soldiers still be living in the hidden depths of Mammoth Cave, maintaining a secret existence that had lasted for more than 120 years? As the investigation into Tommy's survival continued, strange things began happening to the people involved in the case. FBI agents found their reports being classified at levels that seemed excessive for a simple cave rescue story. Medical records from Tommy's examination were sealed and removed from the hospital's files. The rescue workers who had found Tommy alive were quietly transferred to other assignments or encouraged to take early retirement. Several team members reported being visited at their homes by government officials who asked them to sign confidentiality agreements about the case. Jake and Michael, the two boys who had escaped from the cave, began experiencing harassment at school and in their community. Some people blamed them for Tommy's ordeal, claiming that their reckless adventure had caused unnecessary trauma and expense. Others whispered that the boys were lying about parts of their story, suggesting they knew more about Tommy's mysterious caretaker than they were admitting. Both boys developed serious psychological problems in the months following the incident. Jake became withdrawn and stopped participating in normal teenage activities. He spent most of his time alone, refusing to talk about the cave or answer questions about their exploration. Michael's academic performance, which had always been excellent, suddenly declined dramatically. His teachers reported that he seemed distracted and fearful, constantly looking over his shoulder as if he expected to be followed. He filled notebook after notebook with obsessive drawings of cave tunnels and strange symbols that resembled the markings they had seen on the cave walls. Tommy's recovery was also more complicated than his doctors had initially expected. While his physical condition improved rapidly, he continued to experience vivid nightmares about his time underground. He claimed that he could still hear the mysterious footsteps echoing in his dreams, and he insisted that his caretaker was still trying to communicate with him. More disturbing were Tommy's claims that he could remember things that had happened in Mammoth Cave before his own experience. He described events and conversations involving people he had never met, as if he had somehow absorbed memories from the cave system itself. During therapy sessions, Tommy would suddenly start speaking about Civil War soldiers hiding in underground tunnels. He provided specific names, unit numbers, and battle descriptions that were historically accurate, but impossible for him to have known. When psychologists researched these details, they found that Tommy was describing real soldiers who had been reported missing during guerrilla operations in Kentucky during 1863 and 1864. Tommy also began drawing maps of cave systems that didn't match any known areas of Mammoth Cave. His maps showed tunnels, chambers, and underground rivers that no modern explorer had ever documented. When cave specialists examined these drawings, they admitted that Tommy's maps were more detailed and accurate than their own professional surveys of certain areas. the most frightening development was Tommy's claim that his caretaker was still with him. He said that the mysterious figure had followed him back to the surface world and was continuing to watch over him. Sometimes he would set out extra food at dinner, explaining that his cave friend was hungry. Other times he would have long, one-sided conversations with empty rooms, apparently talking to someone only he could see. His grandmother, Mrs. Morrison, reported that strange things were happening in their house. Food would disappear overnight. Doors would be found open in the morning despite being locked the night before, and she occasionally heard footsteps in the hallway when Tommy was asleep in his room. 6 months after Tommy's rescue, a retired park ranger named William Hayes came forward with information that changed everything about the case. Hayes had worked at Mammoth Cave for 35 years before retiring in 1990, and he claimed to have knowledge about the cave system that had never been shared with the public. According to Hayes, there were sections of Mammoth Cave that had been deliberately hidden from official maps and surveys. These areas were known only to a small group of senior park officials and had been kept secret for decades due to safety concerns and historical sensitivity. Hayes explained that during the 1950s, cave explorers had discovered evidence of the Confederate soldiers who had used Mammoth Cave as a hideout during the Civil War. They found underground campsites, abandoned equipment, and most disturbing of all, human remains in areas that had been sealed since 1864. But they also found evidence that some of the soldiers had survived longer than anyone had imagined. Hidden chambers contained personal belongings, diary entries, and carved messages that were dated years after the cave entrances had been sealed by Union forces. The most shocking discovery was a series of journal entries carved into the cave walls, apparently written by a Confederate soldier named Marcus Webb. The entries, dated between 1864 and 1867, described how a small group of soldiers had survived underground by finding alternative routes to the surface and stealing supplies from local farms. According to Webb's carved journal, the soldiers had gradually adapted to life underground. They learned to navigate the cave system in complete darkness, developed methods for finding and storing water, and established hidden caches of food and equipment throughout the tunnels. The final journal entry, dated December 1867, was the most disturbing. Webb wrote about being the last surviving member of his unit, alone in the darkness but unable to return to a surface world where he would be arrested as a deserter. He expressed his intention to remain underground permanently, accepting that the cave system had become his eternal home. Hayes claimed that park officials had suppressed this information to avoid attracting treasure hunters and curiosity seekers to dangerous areas of the cave. They were also concerned about the historical implications of Confederate soldiers surviving for years in a cave system that was technically Union territory. But Hayes's revelations raised even more troubling questions about Tommy's experience. If Marcus Webb had survived until at least 1867, was it possible that he or others had continued living in the hidden areas of Mammoth Cave for much longer? Could the descendants of these Civil War soldiers still be inhabiting the deepest tunnels, maintaining a secret society that had existed for over a century? Hayes admitted that during his years as a park ranger, he had occasionally found evidence of human activity in areas that were supposed to be completely isolated. Fresh footprints in remote chambers, signs that food had been stored and consumed, and strange symbols carved into walls in areas where no official exploration had taken place. Most significantly, Hayes revealed that Tommy Morrison had not been the first person to report being helped by mysterious figures in Mammoth Cave. Over the years, several lost or injured explorers had described similar experiences. Silent caretakers who provided food and water, guided lost people to safety, or kept injured individuals alive until rescue teams could reach them. These reports had always been dismissed as hallucinations caused by stress, dehydration, or hypothermia. But Hayes now believed that Tommy's experience proved these earlier accounts had been true. Someone or something was indeed living in the hidden depths of Mammoth Cave, continuing to help people in distress, just as they had been doing for more than a century. Tommy Morrison's case officially remained unsolved, but the investigation had uncovered enough evidence to suggest a truth that was both fascinating and terrifying. Somewhere in the unmapped depths of Mammoth Cave, it appeared that descendants of Civil War soldiers were still living in isolation, maintaining a hidden community that had existed for generations. These underground dwellers had adapted to life in complete darkness, developing heightened senses and an intimate knowledge of the cave system that surpassed anything known to modern science. They had survived by establishing a careful balance with the surface world, taking only what they needed, and remaining invisible to official exploration efforts. Most remarkably, they had maintained a moral code that compelled them to help people in distress. Just as their ancestors had been helped by local communities during the Civil War, these cave dwellers continued to provide assistance to lost or injured explorers, asking for nothing in return and disappearing back into the darkness when their help was no longer needed. Tommy's mysterious caretaker had likely been one of these hidden residents, someone who had monitored the extensive search efforts and realized that a trapped teenager needed help. They had risked exposure to their secret community by repeatedly visiting Tommy and providing the food and water that kept him alive. But this explanation, while compelling, raised new questions that were even more disturbing. If a hidden community had existed in Mammoth Cave for over a century, how many people were living there? What kind of society had they developed in complete isolation from the modern world? And most importantly, what would happen if their existence became widely known? The government agencies involved in Tommy's case seemed determined to prevent these questions from being answered. The investigation was quietly closed, the evidence was classified, and the people who had been involved were encouraged to forget what they had learned. Tommy Morrison returned to a relatively normal life, but he was forever changed by his month underground. He never spoke publicly about his experience in detail, though he occasionally hinted that there were aspects of his story that he had never shared with investigators. He developed an unusual hobby: cave exploration. Despite his traumatic experience, Tommy became fascinated with underground systems and eventually became a professional cave surveyor. Those who worked with him reported that he had an almost supernatural ability to navigate in darkness and an uncanny sense for finding hidden passages and chambers. Jake and Michael, Tommy's friends who had escaped from the cave, both left Kentucky as soon as they graduated from high school. Jake joined the military and never returned to his hometown. Michael became a geologist, specializing in the study of underground water systems, but he refused to work on any projects involving Mammoth Cave. Mrs. Morrison, Tommy's grandmother, continued to experience strange occurrences in her home for several years after Tommy's rescue. She reported that food would disappear, doors would be found unlocked, and she would occasionally hear voices speaking in languages she didn't recognize. She became convinced that Tommy's cave friend was still watching over her family, protecting them from some unknown danger. Today, more than 30 years after Tommy Morrison's rescue from Mammoth Cave, the mystery of his survival remains officially unsolved. The case files are still classified, the physical evidence has disappeared, and most of the people involved have either died or refused to discuss what they experienced. But the story continues to attract investigators, researchers, and curious explorers who believe that the truth about Mammoth Cave has never been fully revealed. Some have attempted to locate the hidden passages that William Hayes described, searching for evidence of the underground community that supposedly helped Tommy survive. These modern investigations have produced tantalizing hints that the mystery is far from over. Cavers exploring remote areas of Mammoth Cave have reported finding fresh water sources in areas that should be completely dry, food storage areas that appear to be maintained regularly, and carved symbols that match the markings Tommy described seeing during his ordeal. Most significantly, people continue to report experiences similar to Tommy's. Lost explorers describe being guided to safety by silent figures who disappear when rescue teams arrive. Injured cavers tell stories about mysterious helpers who provide food and water until professional help can reach them. The National Park Service maintains that these reports are either hoaxes or hallucinations, but they have quietly increased security around certain areas of Mammoth Cave. Some sections that were once open to experienced cavers are now completely off-limits, with no official explanation for the restrictions. Local communities around Mammoth Cave have developed their own theories about what really happened to Tommy Morrison. Some believe that he was helped by the spirits of Civil War soldiers who died in the cave system. Others think that a secret government facility exists in the deepest tunnels, conducting experiments that require complete isolation from the outside world. The most persistent theory suggests that Tommy's experience was exactly what it appeared to be: evidence of a hidden community that has survived in Mammoth Cave for generations, maintaining their existence through careful secrecy and occasional interaction with the surface world. Tommy Morrison himself, now in his 40s, has never wavered from his original account of what happened during his month underground. He continues to insist that someone kept him alive, that this person was real and not a hallucination, and that the truth about Mammoth Cave is far stranger than anyone has been willing to admit. In recent interviews, Tommy has hinted that his experience in 1992 was not the end of his connection to the mysterious cave dwellers. He suggests that they have continued to watch over him throughout his life, occasionally making their presence known in subtle ways that remind him of his debt to their community. When asked directly whether he believes the cave dwellers are still living in Mammoth Cave, Tommy simply smiles and says that some secrets are meant to be kept. But those who know him well report that he still sets out extra food at dinner sometimes, and that he occasionally speaks to empty rooms as if someone else is listening. The case of Tommy Morrison and the Mammoth Cave mystery represents something that our modern world struggles to accept: the possibility that there are still places on Earth where the impossible can happen, where mysteries exist that science cannot explain, and where the past continues to influence the present in ways we cannot understand. Whether Tommy was saved by the descendants of Civil War soldiers, by spirits of the dead, or by something else entirely, his survival represents a reminder that our knowledge of the world around us is far from complete. In the deepest caves, the darkest forests, and the most remote wilderness areas, there may still be secrets waiting to be discovered. But perhaps some secrets are meant to remain hidden. The mysterious caretakers of Mammoth Cave, whoever or whatever they might be, have survived for generations by avoiding detection and maintaining their isolation from the modern world. Their willingness to help people in distress suggests a moral code that transcends the boundaries between the living and the dead, between the past and the present. Tommy Morrison's month underground changed not only his own life, but also the lives of everyone who became involved in his story. It reminded them that the world contains mysteries that cannot be solved through technology or scientific investigation, puzzles that require faith, imagination, and acceptance of the unknown. Today, visitors to Mammoth Cave can take guided tours through the safe, well-lit passages that have been explored and mapped by generations of cavers. They can admire the natural beauty of underground formations and learn about the geological processes that created one of the world's most extensive cave systems. But somewhere in the darkness beyond the tourist paths, in tunnels that appear on no official maps and chambers that no government survey has ever documented, the mystery continues. The footsteps that Tommy Morrison heard during his month underground may still echo through passages where time moves differently, and the rules of the surface world no longer apply. And sometimes, when modern explorers become lost or injured in the deepest parts of Mammoth Cave, they report experiences that sound remarkably familiar. Silent figures appearing in the darkness, food and water provided by invisible hands, and the comforting presence of someone who understands that even in the Earth's deepest shadows, no one should face danger alone. The mystery of Mammoth Cave remains unsolved, but perhaps that is exactly as it should be. Some truths are too important to be fully understood, and some helpers are too valuable to be exposed to the harsh light of scientific scrutiny. In the end, Tommy Morrison's survival stands as proof that even in our modern age of satellite navigation and instant communication, there are still places where miracles can happen and mysteries can unfold. The question is not whether we believe his story, but whether we are brave enough to accept that the world still contains wonders that exceed our ability to explain them. Deep beneath Kentucky, in the endless darkness of Mammoth Cave, something continues to watch and wait, ready to help the next person who finds themselves trapped between the surface world and the ancient secrets that lie buried in the Earth's heart. The case of Tommy Morrison remains one of the most haunting, unsolved mysteries in true crime history. This missing person case from 1992 proves that some mysterious disappearances defy all logical explanation. When 3 boys vanished without a trace during their cave exploration gone wrong, it became a cold case that continues to baffle investigators today. Disappeared without a trace stories like this remind us that even in our modern world, people can still vanish under the most mysterious circumstances. This suspenseful disappearance story showcases how cave exploration can turn deadly, transforming an innocent adventure into a caving disaster. The missing children case of Tommy, Jake, and Michael demonstrates that true crime missing persons cases often involve more questions than answers. What makes this cave mystery so compelling is how Tommy disappeared while spelunking, yet survived against impossible odds. His mysterious vanishing and miraculous return after a month underground challenges everything we know about survival and cave rescue operations. This real-life suspense story proves that truth is often stranger than fiction. If you're fascinated by unsolved disappearances and cave adventure gone wrong stories, don't forget to subscribe for more true crime mysteries and suspense mystery stories that will keep you on the edge of your seat.